there, and welcome to the online grief seminar today. First, I'd like to start by thanking Cropo Funeral Chapel for hosting the online seminar. And before we get started with Ken here, I just want to remind everyone of Palliative Manitoba's current programs and services. We have our online grief seminars, our telephone bereavement program, as well as our online Kids Grieve and Teens Grieve 2 program. Today's topic is What Do I Do Now? And we have Palliative Manitoba volunteer Ken here to present on that. So I'm going to pass it along to him now.
Hi, so I'm Ken, and I've been a palliative volunteer for the last 14 years. I started with end-of-life visiting with palliative care at Riverview when the program was just starting. And then I moved out of that after a while, and I decided that I would go into the bereavement phone calls, and I've been doing that for 12 years now, and I quite enjoy it. I also have done the memory tree in St. Vital, and this year it was done virtual, but done very well, and the hike for hospice when that is happening as well. So today's topic is, what do I do now? So I started with, I actually interviewed a friend of mine that had some different grief issues throughout her life that were pretty challenging for both her and her family. But first of all, I'm just going to do a little kind of bio on a perspective that I took on grief. So you can't really plan for death, and it doesn't always comply with our wishes, no matter how prepared we think we are. We're never really fully prepared for the way that might turn out. But the loss and grief is a reality. Sometimes it's beneficial to reach out to different guidance or supports that are available to get yourself through this very difficult time. So, sitting down with my friend recently, we were talking about, first of all, she lost a sibling at a very young age. She was in her teens, and the sibling was also in their teens. And it was a tragic accident that happened, and it was one of those things where the police came to the door in the middle of the night, knocked on the door, told their parents that this had gone on, that their child was in the hospital, and things weren't really looking very well. And my friend actually didn't realize that the police had been there in the night, so she had gone to school the next day, and during the course of the day, when it looked like he wasn't going to make it, they came to the school and took her to the hospital to see him. But it was a very different time where people didn't really talk about what that would look like, or the fact that he was acknowledging that he even was dying. And there was some conversations with possible organ donations, and probably the issue of having to take this person off of life support. But it wasn't really known to my friend whether that was even a conversation, because things weren't really talked about at that point. So it was a very difficult, confusing time, because she wasn't really aware of what was going on. No one was really talking about what that was looking like, or how it would all roll out. So in saying that, the funeral part of was a big blur. It was just kind of it was so sudden and unexpected that it was very difficult. And the parents were not really, they were just kind of wrecked from the whole situation. So the environment in their household instantly changed that day. They were very much, the whole family was into music. The house was always full of music. There was dancing, things going on. And they always referred to the day that he passed away as the day that the music died, because their house fell silent. and for a very long time there was no music being played in their household, and it was very isolating and very frustrating to come home to a silent house and to have it continue to be silent all the time. There was a lot of loneliness. The death was not discussed within the family, and also going back to school, there was some of her friends that were available to, they were still friends and some talked about it a little bit, but most people avoided the whole subject, and they just didn't want to talk about it, and they just didn't want to acknowledge that it actually happened. One of the things that I found kind of profound in the conversation was that she had an article of her brother's clothing, and for years and years she always kind of wrapped herself up in it just to kind of be close to him, and to still feel a part of that he was still with her. And about 35 years later, she just recently finally was able to give that article of clothing up and kind of let that part of it go. A lot of her process for dealing with the grief was journaling. She started journaling shortly after, and is still journaling today. And it's kind of funny, she said she hadn't journaled for a while, but in our conversation, she said some of the things that had triggered and come forward in our conversations, that she was going to start journaling again and kind of work through more of what she thought she had already been through. So that was, it was very interesting to me that so much time had passed, and there was still so many things that were kind of unfinished in that that grief and that the tragedy of how that affected a young person and with unfortunately little to no support during that time. Sorry. Most people would just avoid the subject altogether. For many years, the anniversary of his death was always a very sad time, and of course it was a sad time, but she finally got to the point where, rather than dwelling in the sadness of his death, that she ended up turning it around and celebrating the short life that he had. So many years later, as kind of the health issues of her parents came along, her father was diagnosed with dementia, and that was a long, kind of drawn out. And then at the point where he was ready to go into nursing home care, sadly her mother had an unexpected stroke, and they ended up actually going into nursing home care together. But during that time that they had in the nursing home to have conversations and whatever, a lot of what was going on in the process of their grief, they were finally able to talk to her about what those years were like and how many nights that they cried themselves to sleep, and that they just felt that they couldn't talk about it, and it was so hard to just kind of even put one foot in front of the other. So it was very healing in the sense that they were able to eventually have the conversations and to talk about such a tragic loss, and also how it affected and kind of molded their whole lives as to how they functioned, just wanting their child back and kind of really trying to get through that every day, rather than unfortunately getting the help and the resources to move past that. So one of the things that was really very profound for me is and I know that it is out there with Palliative Manitoba now, is that At that time, there was absolutely nothing for children for coping with grief and even talking about any of it through the school process or through basically anywhere in the system. There was really no avenues of support other than hopefully if you had friends that were able to talk to you about it. And journaling was definitely a help, but it was also interesting in the end of our conversation when one of the things that was also very much a healing process was she phoned all of the people and all of the friends that she realized later on in life that had been such a help and support through that system. So she actually phoned them to acknowledge that they did something for her and that they ended up helping her through a very difficult situation and continued to, even with the loss of her parents later on in life. So I thought that was a great idea, actually, that, you know, the people that you know that you maybe never thanked or never even realized that it was happening at the time, to acknowledge what a support they were and to thank them for what they were doing. So I thought that was actually very, very interesting. And one of the other things she did share with me as well, and she actually was going to send it to me, but I chose not to, but she wrote a letter later on in life to her 14-year-old self, to what it was like then and how that felt. And it was really a very good, it was a good thing to do, to kind of just let it go, but also to acknowledge what it was and what that looked like for her at that time. So that was a very interesting share for sure. It was good for, you know, good for her to let it go, but it's also for other people to understand what that grief looks like for a young child and imagine someone with no support and kind of just feeling very isolated and on their own. And one of the things she said with that as well was that her parents were already kind of destroyed by the whole situation, so she didn't really want to be a burden to them by having her grief compound on top of what they were already feeling. So she didn't feel that it was an avenue that she wanted to go to add to their grief by adding her grief into that mix. So it was a very interesting conversation, and I do appreciate that she was willing to share as much as she does. And I also told her that she needs to turn her journals into a book. I think it would be very, very helpful to a lot of people in this day to have those conversations and to look at what that looks like from the beginning early on and kind of where it lands. It was also interesting in the conversation that the early on journaling and grief, when she went to look back at it many years later, was very interesting as to how messed up the grief was and the anger and all of those things that we know are a part of grief, but it was there on paper very clear to her that she'd really come a long way from that young child to where she is today with it. It's quite a difference, but it's actually very therapeutic. And it was a very interesting conversation. So I thank her for that. And I also thought that I would talk a little bit about what COVID grief is like today, as we are in a major pandemic, and as everyone knows, and there's lots of issues with what that looks like, and different levels of what even causes that whole grieving process. Because the pandemic has led us to a series of lots of losses. Safety, our social connections, in some cases our financial security. We're all losing something now, and I think that that's a profound statement. that people are losing family members, but they're losing a lot of things: freedom to go anywhere, to run a private business at this point is very difficult to do, and it's all doing it for all the right reasons, but at the same time it's very hard on everyone's well-being to have all of those things so confined. Most of us have never been through anything like this, and there's some challenging transitions for sure. But it is known that with the help of support, it's critical for moving on with grief for sure. It poses a problem when the physical distancing and isolation, where you have to be at home. It keeps you away from family and friends, but staying connected through phone calls, text messages, video chat, or any social media makes you less isolated. And I highly recommend that anybody that isn't connecting with at least someone in their day, it's a good practice to start connecting with other people, not only for yourself, but I think those other people don't necessarily reach out, and I think that it's a network that needs to be focused on when people are so isolated at this time, because it can be very lonely, and it can be also not healthy in general. It's not normal for us not to connect with other people. We're a very social society, and we need to be in touch with other people. So I think that is very important for us. The grief client that I have at the moment actually receives very limited contact during this time, partially because family are not necessarily in this province, but probably receives only 3 phone calls during the entire week, of which one is me. So it's very important to keep that schedule going and to stay connected to that person at this time, because the conversations are exactly this. There's the worry of COVID, worry of who does want to come and visit or be a part of the connection, and the safety factor versus being alone. But people are following, or some people are following, I hope they are following all of the protocols that are in place, but it's definitely important to stay connected to, and for the people that are looking for the support, need it more now than they ever have. So it's definitely, there's a huge value to being connected with someone. And I would hope that everybody has someone out there that they can stay connected to every day, every other day, whatever it is, just to make sure that they are not sitting alone. So I think that's a good thing. Grief is more complex for sure in a pandemic. Public health measures are to reduce the spread of virus, but it also means that funerals are limited, and those that have lost loved ones may have to grieve alone. They're unable to say goodbye in the way that we normally would. The loss of society and community and living in confinement makes it very difficult for someone to be dealing with the loss of a family member and unable to be a part of the traditional funeral service that would have happened, and the connection with all those people that are your support and mean so much to the person that's gone and also to you. And it's very difficult in this time not having that in play. Right now, people grieve the loss of freedom, the ability to connect with people in ways that are meaningful to them. And I think that's very true, that it is very meaningful, especially in time of grief, to be able to connect with those people, and it makes for a hard time for sure. Virtual funerals and memorial services have been viewed as a positive experience though. And when the options are limited, it's basically the only real option out there. But the general consensus is that that is really a positive way of still connecting with people. Certainly not the same, but it's at a time where that's all we have. It is a great service for sure. We have to make the best to the tribute to our loved ones, and also following the specific guidelines. So that's basically how we have to go with these services at this time. Also, it is very important to practice your own personal care during these times. Eating healthy, walking, exercise, getting out and getting that fresh air, or just exercising to feel more energetic and more have a purpose. Music, reading, even meditation is a good option to take care of, except for the meditation, some of the quiet time. Writing in a journal is very therapeutic, as I've said. It's always a good idea to put your thoughts on paper and kind of let it go, and also over time it's okay to go back and look at those and see what that looks like as well. Also seeking bereavement support, whether that be through an organization or even just call a friend that you know that is willing to listen to how you're feeling, being isolated, and what that looks like. But taking care of our own well-being is very imperative at this time as well. So I think that it's important to do that. And so I would like to conclude in saying I would like to thank Palliative and Cropo for giving me this opportunity today to do this presentation. I hope some of the information was valuable to everyone out there, and I look forward to doing one of these again. Thank you very much.